Thank you very much, Fernando, for this kind introduction, and welcome everybody to today's webinar on cross-border renewables auctions, which I will present as one option for cross-border renewable support or cooperation mechanisms. But first of all, why do we even talk about cooperation on renewable support? Why does cooperation make sense? Well, because there is gains from cooperation. When countries support renewables across borders, they can have access to better renewables potentials in other countries, and therefore reduce the cost of their support. So there is cost increasement potential. Furthermore, using regional synergies and portfolio effects can be realized. If renewables are deployed over a larger geographical area, they are less likely to feed into the grid at the same time. This just as an example for the portfolio effects that can be realized. Also, if renewables are auctioned in larger areas or across borders, there is more competition can be realized. This is especially important for small member states, for example, because their national markets tend to be, by definition, quite small and may have very few actors and thus only little competition. If they now cooperate with other countries, they increase the market size and therefore the competition. And last but not least, countries can realize policy and knowledge transfer when cooperating with each other. Now, my colleague, Corinna Klessmann, together with some others, they have looked at the theoretical support expenditure reduction potentials of very strong cooperation within the European Union, and they have compared how much support expenditure can be reduced if countries actually choose strong cooperation in comparison to a reference scenario with only very limited cooperation. And they have shown that there's theoretical gains of over 10% by which support expenditures can be cut. So this is the main reason why the European Commission has pushed or tried to push member states to engage in close policy coordination and cooperation with regards to renewables. But the European Commission is in general pushing for an internal energy market rather than having separate national energy markets. They are pushing for a harmonization of energy policies, and in particular for a harmonization of renewable support policies. In the past, they have even suggested to introduce a European-wide support instrument, which is the EU quota. However, the member states have their own ideas and their own preferences, and they very much emphasize that energy mix and energy policies are their national sovereignty. So in the past, member states have been reluctant to coordinate their policies, and this has also resulted in very fragmented national renewable support instruments. So in the end, we do have while we do have European targets defined for renewables deployment and carbon emission cuts for 2020 and 2030, there is no European solution for the challenge of transforming the energy system, and the potential gains of policy coordination and close cooperation remain untapped so far. Now here's what I will present today in more detail. First, I will explain and show why there is a new push for more renewables cooperation in Europe and why we will see more cooperation in Europe in the future. I will go into detail about Germany's opening of its renewables energy support scheme, the EEG, with a focus on how the requirement of reciprocity will be implemented. I will illustrate this by taking a closer look at the German-Danish test case. Then I will present the main challenges of conducting cross-border auctions, which are deviations in the market conditions between countries and also differing national preferences for support systems. Now, why do we at Ecofys have something to say about this? Because we have a very strong track record in, first of all, designing or supporting the design of renewables cooperation, and also supporting the design of renewable support policies. And we have supported several players on these issues, but most importantly, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, as well as the European Commission. So, a new push for renewable cooperation in Europe. What is the background? The background, or the foundation of this new push. The European Commission, as I said, has promoted the idea of cooperation between member states since many years, and they have even introduced 3 cooperation mechanisms in their Renewable Energy Directive of 2009. And these are statistical transfer between countries, the statistical transfer of renewable energy generation, that is, the possibility of member states to establish joint projects, and also to establish joint support schemes. Now, the primary aim for introducing these 3 cooperation mechanisms is to facilitate member states' achievement of the 2020 renewables targets through financing renewables generation in member states with lower cost renewables potential. However, there has been very limited use of these cooperation mechanisms so far. Only Sweden and Norway have set up a joint support scheme, and some countries have been and are still exploring the potential of statistical transfers, either because they think they will not achieve their 2020 targets and are interested in buying renewables generation from other countries, or because they are already exceeding their 2020 target and are interested in selling their renewables generation. But what are the reasons for the limited use so far? First of all, there is political barriers. And the main political barrier is a public acceptance issue. Because renewables cooperation always entails that money, that taxpayers' money will flow from one country to another. And it's not so easy to explain to taxpayers that this actually makes sense and benefits the own country and energy system. Second, there is uncertainty, or there was uncertainty on the continuity of the RES framework beyond 2020. So by now we know that there will not be national renewables deployment targets until 2030, but only a EU level target, which however may be somehow also bind the member states and lead to some sort of benchmarks on member state level, but this is still unclear. Now there's also technical barriers, mostly the uncertainty on costs and benefits that are involved with setting up a cooperation, and uncertainty on the design options of cooperation mechanisms. And important also is that there is a lack of transmission infrastructure and a lack of market integration, which may impede countries from or hamper countries in thinking about considering cooperation mechanisms. And there's also legal barriers, of which the most important is the potential incompatibility of cooperation mechanisms with national legislation. However, the idea is gaining momentum at the moment, and this is mainly due to the state aid guidelines for environmental protection and energy that the European Commission introduced in 2014. And under this state aid guidelines, several member states have been forced since 2014 to open their support scheme in one way or another. Now, I will not go into detail about the legal background, why countries can be forced or not, but it is likely that we will see more and more countries being forced to open their support schemes to other countries to some extent. At the same time, the state aid guidelines have pushed or are pushing member states to introduce auctions as a default support mechanism for renewables, and it should be introduced by all member states by 2017. And thereby, we will see a convergence of the national support schemes, which will facilitate the introduction of cooperation mechanisms between countries. Furthermore, cooperation countries may be a key element of the new EU energy framework. So the Council conclusions of 2014, for example, state that the 2030 government system shall facilitate coordination of national energy policies and foster cooperation. It is also quite likely that the new Renewable Energy Directive, which will be published by the end of November, will contain some sort of provisions regarding member states' obligation to open their national support schemes to other countries. So let's take a closer look at Germany's opening of the EEG, the National Support Scheme. The idea or the reason why Germany is now looking at this issue is an agreement it has made with the European Commission in the process of a state aid clearance for the EEG 2014. And the agreement says that Germany will open 5% of the newly installed capacity per year to bidders from other countries. And this roughly equals 250 megawatts per year that will have to be auctioned cross-border or opened to installations in other countries. Now, in order to prepare this opening in 2017, Germany has decided to conduct a pilot opening for auctions for ground-mounted PV in 2016. And so in the course of this year, Germany has developed a concept for the opening, and till the end of the year we'll also conduct a test case by carrying out first cross-border auctions of up to 100 megawatts. Now, the lessons learned from this pilot opening will in the end help to also develop a concept for what we call the partial opening in 2017 and also for the opening of other renewable energy technologies. So Germany has itself also introduced some requirements for the opening, and those are three, and they are the principle of reciprocity. Reciprocity means that Germany will not only open its national support scheme without expecting something in return. So it's not going to be a one-way street, but rather that the partner country will also have to open its national support scheme to renewable installations in Germany, or that there will be at least some form of financial contribution of the partner country for the German auction. This principle of reciprocity and how to implement it will be the focus in this presentation. So I will talk about it more later on. The second requirement is called physical import. And this sort of, the fulfillment of this requirement is to, or shall ensure that an installation financed by Germany that is in a partner country must have some sort of impact or effect on the German power system or power market. And so this is very important for public acceptance. Otherwise, people would ask questions why we are financing projects in countries where that have no impact and no contribution to the German energy transition whatsoever. And the third requirement is to set a cooperation agreement with a partner country that determines the rules. Now, for conducting the pilot opening, Germany needs a partner country. And luckily, Denmark has also been obliged to open its support scheme and has also introduced similar requirements as Germany has. So I will go more into detail about the German-Danish test case in just a couple of minutes. But first of all, let's look at how can we actually implement the principle of reciprocity. And we can do that through various models of opening the auction that entail different intensities of cooperation. The first model is called the unilateral opening. And this basically means that only one country opens its support scheme or its auction, and the partner country contributes to the support payments. The second model is called the mutual opening. Here, both cooperation countries open their domestic auction schemes to one another, meaning that they allow bidders from the other countries to bid into their national auction. The third is the joint auction with separate support schemes. Here, both countries set up one joint auction that is open to bidders from both countries, and the awarded bids will then be assigned to one country's support scheme, so that the existing national support schemes can be used for the payment of the support. And the fourth is the joint auction with a joint support scheme. So here the cooperation countries again set up one joint auction, but they also set up a joint support scheme, which could, for example, be a joint fund in which the countries transfer the money to, or by introducing a joint levy. Now, for the pilot opening, Germany has only taken into consideration the mutual opening and the joint auction with separate support schemes. And in case of the German-Danish cooperation, the countries have decided to do the mutual opening, which means that a German auction will be open to bidders in Denmark, and a Danish auction will be opened to bidders in Germany. So what's the basic concept of mutually opened auctions? Well, as I said, two countries each open their separate auctions to bids from the other country. This is relatively easy to implement because each country can set out the conditions for its own auction, and agreement between the countries is only necessary on very basic parameters of the auction, but not on the details. So it leaves a lot of flexibility for each country and to design its auction. So how does the German-Danish test case actually look like? The German-Danish test case is the first of its kind, the first time that renewables auctions are conducted cross-border. Both countries emphasize that the test case character, so it will be a single pilot auction, which will hopefully take place by the end of this year. But there will not be another pilot auction or another joint or mutually opened auctions between those countries in 2017 or later, at least not that we know of now. And setting up this test case has involved a very intensive exchange between the two countries on the conditions, on their auction designs, and on how information and data exchange between the countries can be handled. The parties involved in this were the national ministries, national agencies and regulators, as well as TSOs, and Ecofys, as well as other consultants, have accompanied this process. The cooperation agreement was signed this summer, and it sets the basic conditions of the cooperation. It describes the process of the data exchange between the two countries, also on the payment of support from one country to the installation of another country. Also, the accounting of the risk reduction is agreed upon in this cooperation agreement, and it will show you how this was decided. So here, just to give you a short overview, the technologies both both the countries have decided for solar PV. However, Germany is only considering ground-mounted PV in its auction. Germany is auctioning 50 megawatts, of which all is auctioned cross-border. This means that the auction result in theory could be that all 50 megawatts are either in Denmark or in Germany, or are split between the two countries, which is the most likely. Now Denmark is auctioning 20 megawatts, of which up to 4.799 megawatts are auctioned cross-border. Now remember the requirement of physical import. Both countries are emphasizing that in this pilot auction, this requirement is not the focus, but still both countries consider that this requirement is fully met because there are very strong direct interconnections between the two countries. In terms of accounting the RES production towards the countries, there's a very simple rule. The country receives the RES production that it funds. So if an installation in Germany is funded by Denmark, the RES generation of this installation is fully accounted towards national targets of Denmark. So which rules apply in these auctions? The starting point are the national auction designs each corporation state. And as I said earlier, there only has to be some agreement on the basic parameters between the two countries. And basically each country sets up support conditions for its own auction. Deviations from the national auction design are only necessary in case rules are not applicable in the cross-border context. I will illustrate this with an example later on. Or if they are against the interest of the corporation country. Now, from the bidder's perspective, it's important that they know all the conditions up front so they can calculate their bid. And ideally, rights and duties should be the same for all bidders. However, there is certain conditions that cannot be aligned. So what are the challenges of conducting cross-border auctions? First, there is a deviation in market conditions. Now, market conditions are also already quite heterogeneous within one country. But if auctions are conducted cross-border, they become even more heterogeneous. And as it lies within the nature of the auction, only the lowest bids will receive support. So this indicates that there is a challenge between public acceptance issues, which can, for example, arise if all successful bidders come from only one country of the participating countries, versus, and this is a trade-off between this acceptability versus efficiency gains that can be reached through cooperation. So this is a question that each country has to, in the end, answer by itself if it can accept that as a result of a cooperation, none of the installations are within its national borders, but are all on the other part of the country. And this raises the question, to what extent do we need to level the playing field by aligning framework conditions to ensure a balanced auction result? To answer those questions, let's look at all the conditions that actually influence the levelized cost of electricity. So the cost of installing and running a renewable installation, which in the end will determine the level of the bid in the auction. First, there is the natural potential or natural conditions. So the amount of solar radiation, the amount of available sites, quality of the available sites, etc. This is a very important factor in determining the LCOE. And this is also a main reason why countries have potential gains from cooperation. Then there's economic and energy economical conditions, such as differences in market prices and values, or differences in interest rates between countries. And here again, it can cut the cost of supporting renewables if they end up being installed in countries with very low market, with very high market prices, because the need of support is, of course, not only determined by the cost of the installation, but also by the value of the market price. So if the market price is high, the additional support payments needed are low. And then there's regulatory conditions, and these include the auction design elements, as well as location-specific conditions, such as taxes or planning regulation and site restrictions. Now, differences in these regulatory conditions between countries can actually lead to distortive effects. And I will go into detail about this in a minute. And last but not least, there's project-specific factors like the investment costs or planning processes that determine the levelized cost of electricity. So let's look at the regulatory conditions. And as I said, different regulatory conditions can lead to distortive effects. Imagine that renewables installations are installed in one country or are only awarded in one country because the tax regime is much more preferable in that than in the other country. Now, from an economic perspective, this is not really an efficient result, because you want the installations where they entail the lowest support costs. So what can we actually do about this? The question here is, do regulatory conditions have to be aligned to ensure an efficient allocation of support payments? Well, there is no general answer. And the answer actually entails that we look more details into the relevance of each regulation and whether it has a distortive effect or not. Here at Ecofys, we have developed a cash flow model which can indicate whether or not these regulations or differences have a strong influence on the LCOE of installation or not. And now, this illustration is just an example, but I want to show you how we can sort of calculate the influence and what it means in reference to other influences on the LCOE. So if we take the example of the business tax here, it shows that if we have 1% higher business tax in one country than in the other, this results in 0.05% higher LCOE. So in that case, but this is just an example, we could say that this distortive effect is very small and can be neglected. However, this kind of analysis would have to be done for each corporation case and requires a lot of data to be done. What we advise is to take a pragmatic approach towards creating a level playing field. This means that because not all the differences between countries lead to strong distortive effects, and also not all regulations can be harmonized in the short term. And that brings us to the second challenge, the different national preferences regarding support systems. Now, the issue of aligning rules is that national regulations are tailored to national policy goals and market conditions, and therefore they don't just appear from nowhere, and therefore cannot be aligned or adapted easily. So cooperating countries need to develop a thorough understanding of how much they want to deviate from the national regulations or from the national auction design to level the playing field for the bidders. Now, the necessary degree of adapting or even aligning the regulation depends on, first, as I've shown, the distortive effects of this regulation or the differences in regulation. Second, whether or not it is part of the auction design or the location-specific conditions. Now, auction design elements are all those rules and conditions that are defined within the framework of the auction, and therefore they can be changed when conducting cross-border auctions. The location-specific conditions, on the other hand, they stem from a broader political context and also rule other policy areas. So take business taxes as an example. These could not just be adapted in the framework of conducting a cross-border cooperation. And the third is the model of cooperation that is chosen. And there is large differences between the need to adapt regulations between the mutual opening and the joint auctions. So as you can see here, the auction design element can be quite different if countries choose mutually opened auctions. There, each member state may draft its own auction design individually and may take into account partial alignments in order to accommodate specific conditions in the other countries. When conducting joint auctions, however, both countries have to agree on a single auction design. Now, the location-specific conditions cannot just be adapted, cannot be adapted easily, or maybe not at all. And here, it's easier to say that the rules and conditions of the country apply in which the installation is to be implemented. So in case of the German and Danish test case, where they have chosen the mutually opened auctions, the deviations from national design is only partly necessary. Now, here are some of the auction design elements of this pilot cross-border auctions between Germany and Denmark. And I don't really want to go into detail about the different design elements, but just highlight where there's differences. For example, in the bid size, Germany is allowing bids of up to 10 megawatts, whereas Denmark is only allowing bids up to 2.4 megawatts. There's quite some big differences in the design of the market premium. In the German auction, a floating premium is introduced. And in the Danish auction, bidders will only receive a fixed premium. And there's some other differences between the two countries. But what is interesting to see here is the part in which Germany had to adapt from its national auction design in order to accommodate for different conditions in Denmark. So the first is the material pre-qualification. In the national auction, the national German auction, the material pre-qualifications are defined, and these are, for example, certain certificates that bidders have to hand in order to show that the project has already undergone certain steps in its planning. And this ensures, acts like an insurance to the state that the bidder will actually realize or is planning to realize this installation. Now, these kind of certificates that Germany is asking for in its national auction do not exist in Denmark. Therefore, this requirement had to be cancelled in the cross-border auction. In return, the financial pre-qualifications have been raised from 50 euros per kilowatt to 70 euros per kilowatt. And the transferability has been restricted because Germany didn't want that that the awards that are given to the successful bidders can be traded across the borders. So there they restricted the transferability of awards, and it is now only possible to transfer it within one company, but not from one company to another. Now, if we look at the location-specific conditions in this pilot auction, we can see that from the bidder's perspective, all the bidders that are in Germany, irrespective of whether they bid into the German auction or the Danish auction, have to comply with the German side restrictions, which means that only ground-mounted PV can be realized. Now in Denmark, the bidders have to comply with the Danish side restrictions, irrespective of whether they bid into the German or the Danish auction. But here there's an exception because Germany does not allow rooftop PV in its auction. So this was excluded from the bidders that are bidding into the German auction. The compensation of curtailment is given in both countries. But when it comes to the remuneration during negative prices, both countries have very different rules. So in Germany, installations will continue to receive remuneration for up to 6 consecutive hours of negative prices at the power market. Whereas in Denmark, installations receive no remuneration during negative prices. Now, if bidders from Denmark had to compete with bidders from Germany in the German auction, this would result in quite a strong distortive effect. So what Denmark and Germany decided is to actually deviate from the rule that the conditions of the country apply in which the installation is implemented, but that the same rules have to apply for bidders that are bidding in the same auction. So in the end, all the bidders bidding into the German auction will receive remuneration during negative prices, and all the bidders bidding into the Danish auction, also when they're located in Germany, will not receive remuneration during negative prices. So, but let's just assume Germany and Denmark had not decided to conduct mutually opened auction, but to conduct a joint auction instead. And here we can very quickly see the size of the challenge of conducting a joint auction, because both countries have to agree on a single auction design. So just to highlight all the differences that currently exist between the two auction designs, on all of these, Germany and Denmark would have to find an agreement. And I can imagine that this would be quite a big challenge if you, for example, look at the design element of the market premium, because Denmark is granting a fixed market premium and Germany is granting a floating market premium. And there's not so many possibilities in between. So on all of these, they would have to find an agreement which sort of gives you an impression on the challenge. If we look at the location-specific conditions here, the main challenge would be to align the rules of remuneration during negative prices. Yes. So, what are the main conclusions from this? First of all, as I said in the beginning, there is gains from cooperation. So cooperation bears a lot of potential to reduce support expenditures for the countries. However, these cooperation gains must be visible for all partners. So we have to have a clear win-win situation to ensure that the cooperation is attractive to everyone involved. Now, setting up the cross-border auction, however, requires looking into the details, and that is the national rules and regulations that already exist, and how they deviate from each other, and if those deviations lead to distortive effects or not. And here we suggest to take a pragmatic approach on cooperation. It is impossible to create a perfect level playing field between the countries. And also, there is no perfect allocation of costs and benefits. And this leads to one of the trade-offs of cooperation. So there is efficiency gain, but there's also we need to look at political acceptability. And in the end, that's something that each state has to decide on its own. What distortions or what deviations from its national design they are willing to accept, what kind of auction result they're willing to accept in order to realize efficiency gains. However, the good news is that the necessity to align the rule depends on the model of the cross-border auctions. So by choosing one model or the other model of cooperation, cooperating countries can find a custom-made solution. And last but not least, we are seeing that cooperation is easier to implement when countries have similar power systems and energy policies, especially similar renewable support policies. And it is also easier to implement when countries are neighbors and have direct interconnections. So for the future, we are more likely to see regional cooperation rather than EU-wide cooperation or cooperation between similar countries or between countries that have no direct interconnection. So thank you very much for listening. I also want to recommend you to listen to my colleagues' webinar next week, which is on the phasing out of economic support to renewables. And now I am curious to hear your questions.